When you think Civil War rhetoric, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? The Gettysburg Address. So we thought it would be really a wonderful way to start the program by having you all participate in a Gettysburg Address speak-off. So we have the text up, and we'll have Brent lead you.
We the people sorry, wrong speech. Okay, there it is. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on the great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in our sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, the living and dead, who struggle here, have consecrated far above our poor power to add and retract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us living that have to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we be here highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Amen.
Thank you, Brent. My speech still has a tremendous amount of resonance, a tremendous amount of power. Found myself getting a little caught up just in reciting it. So what I would like to present to you tonight is a look back at some of these historical figures who communicated so eloquently and memorably during the Civil War. What we really want to impress upon you is that the myth of the great speaker, of Lincoln or even Jefferson Davis, armed with all the evidence and moral righteousness behind him, speaking to an audience full of certainty, without any doubt, is in fact just that. It's a myth. We want to unpack the myth, look a little bit deeper into the historical record, examine the motives of these particular speakers. And I think what we'll find is that the historical record is far more complex than what is often represented in film and what is represented in textbooks. And so we look forward to presenting to you that notion of myth-busting tonight.
So as professors, we can't do anything without inundating you with just a little bit of theory to frame the arguments that we're going to make. And one of the theorists who makes a lot of sense as we start to understand what was happening in the Civil War is Kenneth Burke. And Kenneth Burke talks about trying to understand how rhetoric, or the art of speech, reflects, selects, and deflects reality. In other words, how is it through the words that are chosen by a speaker that a particular way of understanding the world is born? And in 1860s, the technologies of communication are growing, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about editorial cartoons, which were or not a brand new form, but a form that was very widely circulated. But most of the ways that people got the news about these speeches was either through actually attending or through newspaper accounts. And most of the newspaper accounts of the times were verbatim transcripts of the actual speech. So the speech itself and the words selected were incredibly, incredibly powerful. One other thing that's really important is the concept of identification, and that's the idea that as a speaker, I want you to see that I have the best interests of you at heart. And I do that through the selection of the values that I propagate. And as we look through the speeches that we've chosen to highlight, one of the things that we're going to see is the types of appeals used by both the South and the Northern Rhettors, or as we've identified, Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, are really similar.
I'd also like to, bring forth the theories of Lloyd Bitzer, who argued that all rhetoric is situational, that the speaker is always responding to what he called an exigence. There has to be something urgent that begs and necessitates a response. The Civil War is a textbook example of an exigence that multiple rhetors, speakers, tried to respond to. But Bitzer also talked, in addition to the exigence, or the situation that merits, demands a response, that he talked about the audience. That the audience was the only one who could actually resolve the issue. You might think of a crisis of faith. The Civil War really, really tried the souls of men and women on both sides, the North and the South. And so the audience is in a situation to change the exigence, and it comes down to the speaker. She or he ultimately tries to change the exigence, resolve it by appealing to the audience, appealing to their attitudes, and frequently does so, as Sue mentioned, through identification.
I'll just speak for Sam's. One of the importance of the image you'll see above is this is the only known photographic evidence of the Gettysburg Address. The opening image that we had was essentially the mythic Gettysburg Address with Lincoln proclamating to the people standing above, but you can tell from the photographic evidence that the actuality of the Gettysburg Address was not this kind of grand oration. And as we know from the accounts, that it was really very chaotic. And so this image really encapsulates the chaos of the rhetoric of the Civil War.
Even minutes before Lincoln gave this famous address, he complained to his advisors that he was feeling feverish and weak, and historians have inferred that he likely was coming down with smallpox, and that clearly impacted his performance, and also might testify as to why, in addition to other reasons, why the speech was so short. So let's turn to a figure who isn't commonly known in the historical record, but who, I think in her humble face, we see a lion of the 19th century. This is Lucretia Coffin Mont, and she was a famed abolitionist, and she had a remarkable impact. Again, she was agitating primarily before the Civil War took place, but let's take a look at some of what she accomplished. She was a Quaker minister. And she was so dedicated to the cause that she refused to use cotton and cane sugar, anything that was produced by slaves. Right? She founded, in the 1820s, the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. That's certainly a mouthful, but what's notable is that she founded this with African-American women. It was integrated from the very beginning. You can see that she was well ahead of the time. In 1837, 38, and 39, the anti-slavery conventions of American women were held, and she helped to convene these conventions. In 1838, as you can see, a mob actually was successful in destroying the convention hall, but Mott and these other women linked arms and refused to be cowed by these, well, let's face it, they were domestic terrorists. She was advised not to leave her home because it was under attack by those who opposed the abolitionist movement, and especially women speaking on behalf of the abolitionist movement. She refused to leave her home. I think that's remarkable. In 1840, there was the World's Anti-Slavery Convention, and she and other abolitionists went there, but women were excluded from participating. The reason they were excluded from participating, even though they were fundamental in advancing this movement, was that the men who organized this convention were worried that they might bring up issues of women's suffrage. the right to vote, and that might muddy the waters just a little bit. Regardless of the fallacy in reasoning that entailed, she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and many of you might be familiar with that name at the World's Anti-Slavery Convention. And she became friends with Stanton. She mentored her and helped organize the Seneca Falls Convention. As any historian knows, this is a watershed moment for women. In 1849, as you can see here, she gave a sermon called Sermon to the Medical Students. This was the only speech of hers that was ever published, and so we'd like to delve into that just a little bit. Again, I highly doubt any of you are familiar with this speech. Regardless, she had three themes that she addressed in this particular speech. The first is what we call the internal locus of moral authority. As a Quaker, she impressed upon her audiences that it wasn't priestly authority to which people should draw their inspiration, that the divine light, providence, was housed within. And so let's take a look at some of these quotations from the speech. We may understand the sacred harmony and the melodious note arising in the soul without a dependence upon measured lines or the music of the voice, right? Without someone being really, really eloquent, like Brent Roberts. Without the intervention of words or the aid of the priest or minister. She was impressing upon these medical students, many of whom were women, right? Find your moral center from within. You don't need to locate it anywhere else. Later in the speech, she notes the former dependence of the monopoly of the pulpit is broken. The people are thinking and acting for themselves and their fellow human beings in the various relations to society. Again, finding that moral center and the responsibility within. As you can see here, she also notes the light of truth is revealed to you, your noble powers, and the responsibility of exercising them in the purity with which they have been bestowed. Carry out your principles among your associates. And so there's almost an evangelical sort of appeal here. Not only are you to sort of trust your conscience, but you are to do something with that conscience. You are not just to sit on it. Right? You are to act. This then is the religion that is offered to your acceptance. I would not weary you with words, fully believing that each of us has a teacher within himself. In obeying this, we need not that any man should teach us. It will be found superior to any other revelation, to anything external. Come then to this principle, this word of God of the soul, and you will be led into all righteousness and truth. Powerful, powerful words. To continue this theme, one last segment. We have the revelation of God as much in this age as in any that has ever come before us. And if we have faith, we shall do the things done in former times and greater. That which has been spoken in the ear in closets shall be heard upon the rooftop. May all the difficulties that have hindered the progress of true religion be removed. May it be stripped of the gloomy appendages of the sects. What's she talking about here? The context is that many folks in the South, many good-intentioned folks, were unclear as to what the biblical message was regarding slavery. In the Old Testament, there seems to be some support for it. The New Testament is far, far more vague. And so what Mott is doing here is cutting to the quick. She's saying, don't let religious leaders tell you that this is a vexing, complex issue. When it comes to slavery, trust your instincts. And your instincts will invariably lead you to oppose it. The second theme that Mott talks about is the rejection of mystery and abstraction. Let me read to you this next section here. I confess to you, my friends, that I am a worshiper after the way called heresy. That's a strange tactic for a religious leader. A believer after the manner which many deem infidel. The doctrine that Jesus most emphatically taught that the kingdom of God is within man. That there is his sacred and divine temple. This religious doctrine is simple because it appeals to self-evident conviction. It is divested of mystery and mysticism, for it is not necessarily connected with anything miraculous or extraordinary. Here again, she's saying, don't be clouded by your judgments on this issue. What does your heart say? Your heart tells you that slavery is wrong, that slavery is an abomination. Don't try to make it a complex issue, because it's really not. She continues, this is the beauty and divinity of true religion, that it is universal. Wherever man is found, these great attributes of deity are there found. A nice sense of justice, a quick perception of love, a keen apprehension of mercy, and all the glorious attributes of God, without puzzling his mind with attempts to reconcile his imagined infinite justice with a prescience of his infinite power. Right? Again, touching on these particular things. I want to get to the issue, her third point, and her third theme is that slavery ultimately is evil. Evil, this mighty sin which so easily besets us. There are those here who have had their hearts touched, who have been led to feel and have entered into sympathy with the bondman, and have known where the evil lies. May you be faithful and enter into consideration as to how far you are partakers in this evil, even in other men's sins. Love that strategy there. How far, by permission, by apology or otherwise, you are found lending your sanction to a system which degrades and brutalizes 3 million of our fellow human beings, which denies to them the rights of intelligent education, rights essential to them, and which we acknowledge to be dear to us. That pronoun us is what Sue was talking about when she referred to identification. Mott is talking to an audience of free white women primarily. And many of those doctors, women doctors from the South, walked out, stormed out of this particular presentation. But as you can see, Mott is tying into the religious impulse of the age. Both the North and the South both appealed to Christian principles in defense of their positions. And it's interesting that a Quaker minister, decades before the Civil War actually started, was making these points.